The Caribbean night was calm until it erupted with the roar of engines and the sharp crackle of encrypted radio traffic. At precisely 2:15 a.m., radar operators aboard the guided missile destroyer USS Ross detected a sudden burst of Venezuelan patrol craft surging out of the Gulf of Venezuela. Their silhouettes cut across the moonlit water like shadows armed with steel. Within moments, the calm ocean became a chessboard of naval power. On the other side, Venezuelan Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez had already announced the mobilization of 15,000 troops and a swarm of unmanned aerial vehicles to patrol the coast. But no one expected the sudden deployment of high-speed corvettes edging dangerously close to U.S. waters. For Washington, this was not just a patrol, it was a test, a signal, a warning. The question hung heavy. What changed in that instant to alter the balance of power in the Caribbean? Do not just watch, engage. If clear-eyed analysis matters to you, hit like, subscribe, and comment. Your voice fuels our mission. By dawn, the horizon of the Caribbean was no longer silent. Venezuelan warships formed a loose arc near the entrance to the Gulf, their radar masts scanning in tight, restless circles. From the deck of the USS Lake Erie, sailors watched the growing formation with binoculars, measuring every movement against the rules of engagement. At first glance, it seemed like a simple display of force. Yet beneath the surface, the situation carried a different weight. Unmanned aerial vehicles buzzed overhead, mapping the sea lanes, while fast attack craft darted between fishing vessels, blurring the line between civilian traffic and military maneuvers. The U.S. destroyers maintained distance, but every mile closed by Venezuela carried the risk of collision or something far worse. It looked like a routine standoff, but one misplaced order, one accidental launch, could ignite a confrontation no side had prepared for. Could this be an irreversible mistake? At 4:12 a.m., alarms ripped through the USS Ross. Radar screens showed a cluster of fast craft surging from the Gulf of Venezuela. Then came the chilling confirmation missiles, Chinese-made C-800 and two-second, launched from hidden Venezuelan frigates. Only 12 nautical miles away, 4 minutes to impact. The destroyer fired interceptors. Blazing trails cut across the night, smashing several warheads mid-air. But not all. One missile broke through, forcing the phalanx gun to unleash a storm of tracers. The weapon ripped the missile apart, the explosion shaking the ship so violently sailors staggered to the deck. The Ross had survived, but just barely. The silence that followed was worse than the roar. Venezuela had just crossed the line. And then, a second shock. Strange radar pulses east of Curaçao, encrypted in Chinese signatures. Was Beijing watching in real time, turning this clash into a rehearsal for the Pacific? Do you think this was a Venezuelan gamble or China's hidden strategy unfolding? At 4:45 a.m., 12 more missiles streaked across the sea. U.S. destroyers fired again. 7 were intercepted, but 5 kept coming. The Ross deployed chaff, 3 missiles fell away, but 2 remained. The phalanx roared, shredding one. The last warhead exploded 300 yards away, rocking the ship like a hammer blow. Then the sky darkened. Drones swarmed low over the waves, their jammers bending U.S. radar. From the west, Venezuelan Su-30 jets climbed with Russian R-77 missiles under their wings. Above them, FA-18 Hornets from the USS George Washington roared in to intercept. Missile locks screamed in cockpits. Pilots launched, dodged, countered. No one fell, but the skies were now a battlefield. Beneath the sea, sonar picked up the slow hunt of 2 Venezuelan Kilo-class submarines. They stalked the U.S. fleet like wolves. Orders came from Washington. Do not fire shadow only. One mistake below the waves could turn a standoff into a bloodbath. And just as the U.S. seemed to steady, another strike. Venezuelan coastal batteries fired at shipping lanes, sending tankers scattering. Markets reacted instantly. Insurance rates spiked. Oil prices jolted. War wasn't just military, it was economic. Would you, as the U.S. commander, strike back now or hold, risking humiliation but avoiding global escalation? At 6:10 a.m., the Caribbean stillness fractured into unease. The U.S. destroyers USS Ross and USS Lake Erie cruised at 15 knots, their radar masts rotating in relentless circles. Each sweep painted a picture of the waters ahead, yet every return carried a shadow of doubt. To the west, Venezuelan corvettes shifted formation. Their navigation lights dimmed, creating the illusion of civilian traffic. To the east, faint radar contacts winked in and out, unmanned aerial vehicles darting like mosquitoes across the sky. From inside the Combat Information Center of the USS Ross, the air smelled of burnt coffee and steel. A petty officer leaned into his console, tracking encrypted bursts of communications bouncing from Maracaibo. Linguists picked up Spanish commands, but hidden within the signal was something stranger. Intermittent Mandarin phrases, technical codes spliced into the chatter. It was more than a slip. It suggested coordination. It hinted that Venezuelan officers were not alone. The question weighed on every analyst. Was this purely Caracas's defiance, or had China embedded itself in the Caribbean chessboard? At 6:25 a.m., radar screens rippled again. A wave of drones approached, this time from the south, flying higher, around 4,000 feet. Their silhouettes were larger, their wings bristling with pods. Within seconds, U.S. radars began to stutter. The enemy had shifted tactics. These drones were configured for electronic attack. The SPY-1D radar aboard the Ross flickered as jamming beams painted its frequencies. Trackers wavered. Lock-on signals faltered. For a brief 20 seconds, the American defense grid blinked. In a real exchange, those seconds could prove fatal. The captain gave a terse command: engage air cover. 2F. A-18 Super Hornets already circling above dove into the intercept. At 12 nautical miles out, the first pilot thumbed his trigger. An AIM-9X Sidewinder missile roared away, its seeker head burning bright. In less than 8 seconds, a Venezuelan drone disintegrated in fire. Another followed, shredded by a second missile. But 3 slipped through, retreating into cloud covering, their interference continuing. It was a reminder. Even primitive drones, backed by foreign algorithms, could punch holes in America's layered defenses. At 6:30 a.m., the duel shifted beneath the waves. The USS Newport News, silent in the depths south of Aruba, had been tracking 2 Venezuelan Kilo-class submarines for over an hour. Kilos, with their diesel-electric engines, earned the nickname Black Holes for their ability to vanish into thermal layers. The sonar operators reported faint cavitation sounds, propeller blades turning slowly, deliberately. The subs were tailing the U.S. formation at a distance of 20 nautical miles. Their torpedo tubes, if armed, could strike within minutes. The submarine's commander requested authorization to fire. Silence filled the line. A torpedo launch would remove the threat, but it would also ignite a war. Washington responded with measured restraint. Shadow only, no engagement unless hostile fire is confirmed. For the sailors inside the Newport News, the command felt like walking a tightrope in pitch black. At 6:45 a.m., the skies erupted. Venezuelan Su-30 Mk2 fighter jets, Russian-built and supersonic, blasted off from a coastal base. Their afterburners lit the dawn, each armed with R-77 beyond visual range missiles, threats capable of killing a U.S. jet at 50 miles. The George Washington's radar operators tracked the climb. Hornet pilots adjusted their altitude to intercept. In the thin air above the Caribbean, 2 doctrines collided: Russian design versus American innovation. At 70 miles, missile locks buzzed in cockpits. A Hornet fired first, an AIM-120 Amram Street reeking at Mach 4. The Venezuelan pilot countered with flares in a steep dive. The missile missed. Seconds later, a Su-30 returned fire. The American pilot pulled high G turns, countermeasures blazing, and watched the hostile missile fizzle harmlessly. No one was lost, but the confrontation signaled that Venezuelan skies were now contested airspace. The question burned: how long could restraint hold before blood was shed? At 7:00 a.m., the battle leapt from ocean to politics. In Caracas, state television broadcast images of Venezuelan sailors waving from their decks, framed as heroes resisting an invasion. Crowds filled Bolivar Square, chanting against Washington. Anchors declared victory even as U.S. destroyers remained unbroken on the horizon. Meanwhile, inside the White House Situation Room, the president sat surrounded by generals and cabinet secretaries. Live feeds from the Caribbean glowed across screens. Missile intercepts, drone swarms, fighter duels. Advisors clashed in whispers and shouts. One camp demanded decisive action. Sink their corvettes in this farce. Another camp cautioned, the moment a Venezuelan hull goes down, Moscow and Beijing will weigh in. The Caribbean becomes a trigger for global escalation. One general's voice cut the room. One wrong move here, and the Pacific lights up tomorrow. At 7:15 a.m., the U.S. Navy unveiled its next card. From the deck of the George Washington, not only fighters but EA 18-gram growlers screamed into the sky. Their mission was invisible but devastating: electronic attack. Flying low, they targeted Venezuelan radar sites and frigate command nets. Bursts of electromagnetic energy, powerful enough to blind a battleship, pulsed through the airwaves. Screens aboard Venezuelan vessels went dark. Fire control radars froze mid-sweep. Communications turned to static. For the first time since dawn, the tide shifted visibly. The U.S. Navy reminded the world that its power was layered not just missiles and guns, but invisible dominance over the electromagnetic spectrum. At 7:30 a.m., NATO's monitoring post in Lisbon relayed an ominous alert. A Chinese Yuan-class submarine had been detected transiting the Atlantic just days earlier. Its present position was unknown. Analysts whispered the chilling possibility that the Venezuelan standoff was not an isolated incident, but a coordinated probe. Could Beijing be testing U.S. response speed, measuring how far and fast its fleet could stretch between oceans? The specter of a two-ocean confrontation loomed. The Caribbean might be only the opening act. At 7:45 a.m., the crisis deepened into civilian chaos. Venezuelan coastal batteries fired unguided rockets not at military targets but toward maritime shipping lanes. None struck a vessel, but tankers diverted course, fearing escalation. Insurance premiums for Caribbean shipping spiked in real time. Traders in London adjusted oil futures before the battle had even ended. The economic cost of the morning was already in billions. Even without casualties, the confrontation was bleeding global markets. By 8 o'clock a.m., the U.S. formation held steady. The destroyers bore scars of missile strikes narrowly avoided. The Hornets patrolled in constant arcs overhead. The Newport News stalked silently, torpedoes primed but unfired. The Venezuelan Navy, battered by electronic disruption but still defiant, clung to its positions. No side had retreated, no side had fully advanced. But the meaning was clear. This was no longer about narco-trafficking or smuggling patrols. It was about credibility, whether the U.S. Navy, the keeper of global maritime order, could be challenged in its own hemisphere without unleashing decisive power. The crew aboard every ship knew one truth: one moment of hesitation could bring peace. One wrong order could ignite a two-ocean war. If you were sitting in Washington's Situation Room at this exact hour, would you advise unleashing decisive strikes to prove U.S. dominance or holding the line, trusting restraint as the stronger weapon? At 8:15 a.m., just as both fleets seemed locked in a fragile balance, an anomaly appeared. The USS Lake Erie's SPY-1D radar caught a faint blip, then another. At first, operators dismissed them as echoes, reflections from turbulent air. But within 90 seconds, the truth unfolded. High-altitude signatures, descending fast from the east. The watch officer stiffened. That trajectory, it's not Venezuelan. A chill swept through the Combat Information Center. The tracks were coming not from South America, but from the Atlantic off the coast of Africa. Analysts cross-checked the radar feed with satellite relays. The signatures matched Chinese WZ-10 stealth drones launched from an unknown mothership. The Caribbean crisis had just transformed. A second front, hidden until this moment, had entered the battlefield. At 8:18 a.m., the first drone broke through cloud cover. Its composite skin reflected almost nothing, but infrared sensors caught the faint heat of its twin engines. The drone banked hard, activating a surveillance pod. Within minutes, encrypted transmissions began relaying data across the globe. The drones weren't here to fight, they were here to map. Every American radar frequency, every missile launch protocol, Every electronic countermeasure was being cataloged and transmitted. "They're building a playbook," muttered one officer. "Not for today, for the Pacific." At 8:20 a.m., the USS Ross scrambled its close-in weapon system as one drone cut dangerously low, only 300 feet above the deck. Sailors held their breath, expecting gunfire. But no trigger was pulled. The drone passed overhead like a phantom, recording every angle of the ship. The captain understood the message. This was not Venezuelan bravado. This was Beijing's hidden strategy revealed. Use Venezuela as a proxy, use the Caribbean as a rehearsal, and prepare for a larger clash in the Pacific. At 8:25 a.m., chaos deepened. All at once, communications across the U.S. strike group flickered. Screens went black. The ship's navigation computers stalled, resetting into diagnostic mode. The outage lasted 27 seconds, but to combat officers, it felt like an eternity. The intrusion was traced back to satellite relays, not local jamming, but a cyber strike routed through ground stations in Hainan, China. The silence aboard the Ross was suffocating. The world's most advanced navy had just been blinded, if only briefly, by an enemy thousands of miles away. At 8:30 a.m., the final twist arrived. Venezuelan television interrupted its broadcast with breaking news. Anchors triumphantly declared that a foreign ally had joined their defense. A grainy video showed Chinese-made drones circling over U.S. destroyers, framed as evidence of Beijing's solidarity. The information war detonated instantly. Within minutes, hashtags trended across social media: China protects Venezuela, U.S. Navy humiliated, and the Caribbean belongs to the global South. For U.S. commanders, the danger was no longer just missiles or submarines, it was perception. America's credibility as the guarantor of global order was being chipped away in real time. At 8:35 a.m., the president received the briefing. Advisors urged caution. Firing on Chinese drones could escalate the confrontation into a direct U.S.-China clash. Yet doing nothing risked humiliation, emboldening adversaries across two oceans. The room fell silent, the weight of history pressing down. One moment of hesitation could prevent war. One moment of weakness could guarantee it. By 9:00 a.m., the confrontation in the Caribbean had not ended with fire, but with silence. The Venezuelan fleet lingered on the horizon, bruised but unbroken. American destroyers remained in formation, every radar beam and gun mount ready. Above, drones, some Venezuelan, some foreign, continued their circling vigil. There was no victor. Yet in the stillness, one truth was undeniable. The battle had already altered the balance of power. For the sailors aboard the USS Ross and USS Lake Erie, the morning had proven that even in what Washington once considered its safest waters, threats could arrive: layered missiles, drones, submarines, cyber strikes, and foreign interventions, all converging in a single theater. What was once a campaign against narco-trafficking had transformed into a live rehearsal for great power competition. The lesson was stark. Geography no longer guarantees security. A crisis in the Caribbean can ripple into the Pacific. A signal in Maracaibo can echo from Guangzhou. And a drone circling above a destroyer in the Caribbean sky can rewrite doctrines written half a world away. The United States, for more than 70 years, has carried the mantle of global order. Its aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, and aircraft have served not merely as instruments of war, but as symbols of stability. On this morning, that mantle was tested in ways no one expected. Not by a fleet equal in size or sophistication, but by a mosaic of asymmetric tools: cheap drones, aging submarines, foreign cyber intrusions, and propaganda networks designed to fracture perception. It was a warning to every strategist. The next war may not begin with the thunder of guns, but with the silence of a hacked radar screen or the flicker of a false broadcast. For Venezuela, the gamble bought headlines but carried risk. For China, the hidden hand revealed ambition without overt fingerprints. For the U.S. Navy, the confrontation reaffirmed both its strength and its vulnerability. America's layered defenses had held. No destroyer was lost. No carrier crippled. Yet the image of invulnerability, the aura of untouchable dominance, had been chipped. The Caribbean crisis reminded Washington that credibility is not inherited. It must be proven, day after day, mile after mile, patrol after patrol. And so, as the George Washington's Air Wing returned to its decks and the Ross reset its radar arrays, one question lingered not only for the sailors, but for the nation they served. How long can restraint hold before deterrence itself begins to fracture? For the American audience watching this unfold, the answer must be clear. Military power does not exist to start wars, it exists to prevent them. To show adversaries that aggression, no matter how subtle, no matter how layered, will always meet resistance. To remind the world that America's Navy sails not to conquer, but to keep oceans free. Because one moment of weakness in the Caribbean could echo into the Pacific. One careless hesitation could trigger a decade of instability. And one unanswered challenge could embolden rivals from Caracas to Beijing. The confrontation ended without missiles striking hulls, without torpedoes detonating in the deep. Yet history will remember it not as a quiet morning at sea, but as a moment when the world glimpsed the precarious balance of the 21st century. A balance where every decision carries the weight of war and every display of strength carries the hope of peace. Do you believe strength truly deters chaos? Or do you think restraint carries the greater power? Comment below because your voice matters in shaping how history remembers this moment.